video we're going to be looking at the difference between automatic and discretionary stabilisers and how they both operate in both a peak and a trough. So first of all, we have three types of budget outcome. We have a budgeted balance where income is equal to expenditure. We have a deficit when the amount of income the government collects is less than their expenditure. We have a deficit. And then we have a surplus when the government income in different taxes and other forms of revenue exceed their expenditure. Generally, this one is considered to be the most expansionary because the government is leaking less than they're injecting back to the economy. Automatic stabilisers. Automatic stabilisers, as the name suggests, happen automatically. They are basically changes to the budget that occur without the government physically having to do anything. They occur automatically and they are related to changes in the business cycle or the cyclical component of the government. So basically any automatic stabiliser is anything that can happen that affects the budget without the government having to implement a specific policy. There is no change to the structural component of the budget. Okay? Basically, if the government did nothing, the budget would still go up and down, or the outcome would go up and down based on what stage we were in the business cycle. So for example, if we are in times of low economic growth, we would have lower taxes because less people would have an income. We'd also be collecting less GST because less people would be spending. And the government would be forking out more in welfare due to higher unemployment. So these things would all be pushing us further into deficit during a trough because we're going to be collecting less tax and paying more welfare. So we generally have large deficits when we are in a trough in the business cycle. But they are also helping to stimulate or stabilise the economy. Because we're paying less taxes and the government's paying more in welfare, that's helping to boost aggregate demand and boost consumption spending and prevent us from slowing down too much. So if we are in this phase where, let's say this was our business cycle, we're down here in the trough, these two automatic stabilisers are helping to pick the economy up. When we are in a peak, so if we're at this point here, we're going to be paying higher taxes, people will be pushed into higher tax brackets, more people will have a job, and we'll be collecting less welfare. And that will push us further into surplus, but it will also lead to bigger, will also slow the economy down and prevent the peak from continuing because we'll have shortages of resources. So the fact that we're paying more tax and getting less welfare will slow the economy down. And there'll be more company tax and more GST in those periods as well. So during an economic downturn, automatic stabilisers, we have greater welfare assistance due to increased unemployment. We have lower income levels, pushing people into lower tax brackets, which is both helping to stimulate the economy, without the government doing anything physically to make that happen. Discretionary stabilisers. Discretionary stabilisers are the deliberate policies the government makes. So automatic happens with the business cycle. Discretionary stabilisers, the government has to physically do something. It will also be referred to as the structural component of the budget or the deliberate component of the budget. So for example, if we're in an economic downturn, what could the government do in terms of discretionary stabilisers? Well, they could spend money on infrastructure, they could give tax concessions, they could give everyone cash, they could lower income taxes, they could put money into jobs and a plan for the future, so putting money into schools and housing and infrastructure. All of these things are going to push us further into deficit, but they're going to help us to avoid recession and pick the economy up and boost aggregate demand. So all of these things are physical things the government can do to get us out of a trough. If we're in a peak, they might reduce infrastructure spending, or increase taxes, or cut welfare. That would be, if they're doing it physically, that would be a discretionary stabiliser. So what will happen to automatic and discretionary stabilisers during a peak? Well, automatic stabilisers will collect more income tax, will collect more GST, will collect more company tax, will pay less welfare. That will help to slow the economy down. Discretionary stabilisers, well, they might increase taxes, they might increase the marginal tax rates, they might increase the rate of company tax, they may reduce infrastructure spending. Again, this will all push us into surplus, but help slow the economy down. Here's just a topical question I addressed in class, so I'm not going to spend too much detail on this, but if the government wants to balance its budget during a trough or a recession, they would have to raise taxes because they're going to have a big deficit, so they need to generate more revenue. Also, we went through these in class. Some of the harder ones, if we increase the number of defence personnel, it's a physical thing they're doing, so it's discretionary. If they physically lower the company tax rate, that's discretionary. They offer tax concessions, that's discretionary. If they physically increase pensions, that's discretionary. Any infrastructure projects are discretionary. But all the other things related to lower income taxes, lower company taxes, higher unemployment benefits, increased GST, all of those things can happen naturally, and therefore they're automatic as a result of a business cycle. The minerals resource rents tax doesn't get as much revenue as possible, and Again, that's going to happen automatically because the policy's already been implemented in past years. Now we're just determining how much revenue it's collecting. So here's just an example of a couple of questions from your booklet. Explain the difference between automatic and discretionary stabilisers. Provide an example of each. Automatic stabilisers are changes in tax and welfare that occur automatically to smoothen out the business cycle. For example, when economic growth is slow, the government collects less revenue from tax and pays out more in welfare without any deliberate changes. That's your automatic stabiliser, and it picks up the economy and boosts aggregate demand. Discretionary stabilisers, deliberate policies to alter the budget outcome or our level of spending and aggregate demand, e.g. increasing taxes on high income earners by 2%. How do automatic and discretionary stabilisers work to have a stabilising effect on the economy? Talk about them in relation to what happens in a recession. So automatic and discretionary stabilisers act to stabilise economic activity by boosting economic activity during a trough and slowing it down in a peak. And then provide examples of how they both work. In a recession, citizens will pay less tax due to high levels of unemployment and collect more in welfare, which will help to stimulate growth, stimulate aggregate demand, and reduce unemployment. The government could also implement discretionary policies, for example, reducing tax rates to push us further into deficit, but also to help the economy to grow. Next video, the difference between estimated and actual budget outcomes.